Good afternoon, colleagues. It's TBruce coming to you from my last day in Michigan. I've been writing so much, my eyes are blurry as can be, so I'm wearing probably my wife's glasses, maybe her mother's glasses. But I think they look good. And I've got my button-down shirt on because we don't want any owliness happening here. So let me get on with my pilot study for you. My pilot study was based on the school placement procedures for students each year, and the introduction goes a little bit like this. In all situations, it's a group of well-meaning people placing students into what they believe is the best instructional environment for the following year. However, these well-meaning stakeholders often place students, or other students will say, into situations that are not fair year after year after year. Thereby we have the problem. This qualitative study will explore the teacher's perspectives on the equity of present student placement processes. One of my favorite authors in this whole lit review was Calogrides and Loebs from 2013. They researched 4 large urban school districts and discovered that this process of classroom roster fabrication was similar across the nation, but found that it was anything but balanced or equitable. The second and third part of my introduction is the purpose of my study, but also my 4 research questions. The purpose of my study goes like this. This study is to explore the teacher's perspective of their participation in the student placement process. And what I hope to do is find out more about, do they understand what's happening kind of behind the scenes or with all students. My introduction, third part of the introduction, or my 4 questions, are: how are classroom rosters created to place each child in his or her most beneficial setting for success? Again, what is the teacher's process or job in that process? And number 2, what are elementary teachers' perceptions of the student placement process in regards to fairness for all students? And as I get into the interviews, you'll notice I interviewed 2 teachers, and you'll see the difference there. Number 3, what are the varying levels of instruction on the same topic in the same grade within the same school site? In other words, if you're looking at 2 third-grade classrooms and one student has a lot of the high-achieving students or has parents that are very supportive, and another class has ELD students, low socioeconomic, disruptive students, and so forth, does the instruction look different? So it's another way of asking teachers the question, is your class different than your peers' class? And then last, what can be done to start moving school systems away from the common student placement practices? So I'm kind of jumping ahead to, I understand, because I'm doing all this reading, that this placement process isn't fair and equitable. My hope is, if I ask those teachers, what should we change or what can we do to change that process, to find out what they think would change, because their role is very, very big in this process. Alright, next we're going to talk about my review of literature. And again, this is only a 20-minute video, so we're going to try and keep this quick. But one of my favorite researchers, again, was Kramer's. Kramer had a bunch of groups, and they did a qualitative study in 2011 and found that teachers, principals, parents, health aides, special education staff, and various other members were all part of this process for placing kids. They also found that, of course, students and parents were involved as well, as I said earlier. Teachers seem to be one of the most strongest pieces in this process, because they're the ones that are receiving information from parents first. If you think about this process, it doesn't just take place the day that we're sorting cards. This thing starts weeks, even a months ahead, when parents start coming to, the advantaged parents, I might say, start coming to the teachers and asking, okay, so who should be best for next year? We don't want that person, we want another person for next year. The teacher can either choose to accept those and honor those requests, or they can just forget about them as well, right? So there's a huge power piece there, and there's an ethical piece there as well. At the same time, what a parent believes is the right setting or the right teacher for their child may be different from what the teacher or even the principal thinks is the right person for that child. How your child acts at home is much different than how they act in a classroom. I can't comment. Research has found overall that students with lower test scores more often end up in novice teachers' classrooms, and his peers are more often similar to him than being truly heterogeneous, and that's Caligrides from 2013. I've talked about the big players in other videos. Check my videos, where the principals have a big piece in this. Now, a lot of people would say, well, the principals have the most power, and in the end, they do. But your authority is between your queen bees and very influential parents, right? Maybe your PTSA president, vice president, or fundraising parent, you know? So principals have a hard time just making a decision because there's other outside pressures coming onto this child placement process. But nonetheless, they're trying to find an optimal match, as Fink said in 2012. And he also called it an intricate balance of request and intentional choices. Kramer et al. Found that principals try and find the best place for all students. But then in the end, Monk from 1987 found that most school principals evenly distribute students in the elementary grades as best they can. Students and parents also are very powerful in this process. Kramer found in 2011 that parent requests are often offered and most of the time are granted. Now, in my setting personally, I always say a request is that. It's just a request. But in most cases across the nation, Kramer found that requests are normally granted. This is part of the problem with the process. Raudenbush in 2004 noted that parents often shop for a specific school and then once involved in that school shop for specific teachers. Now, if you think about that, you may contrast that with a family of non-English speakers or low socioeconomic family where they're maybe working 2 or 3 jobs, or even a different ethnic background where they don't feel as eager to come into the classroom and talk to the teacher or even the principal. And finally, research showed that low SES and ELD students received notably different instruction, and that was Belfi in 2011 and Conger in 2005 and Caligrides et al. In 2013. It's more likely that their peers will be low SES and ELD as well, and I put that one down earlier. My grounded theory states that students realize and know they are in groups of less advantaged or less knowing, and this decreases self-perception and student achievement. These two pieces come from Hargreaves in 1967 and Richer in 1976. My final piece of literature review goes through how I did the search strings, and that was important because as I went through the search strings, I started out with things like elementary school, student placement, and so forth, but really ended up on better terms such as balanced classrooms, effective education, heterogeneous grouping, non-discriminatory, and equal education. Those kinds of things brought me to the literature reviews that I noted earlier. We are now in the methodology and data collection section, and this qualitative study will utilize an ethnographic lens to understand the culture and pressures surrounding the student placement process. As I stated earlier, often this process takes place over many days or even months. And I say that because it's the informal pieces that are the pressures or create the pressures that make this process less heterogeneous or change the classroom compositions to something that's less equitable. And that's the piece I wanted to see if the teachers understood or realized or felt. So that's what I'm exploring in this qualitative piece. Understanding the nature of the main players and their explanations of their participation in the process will be key to understanding why the process works as it does. This exploration may help to understand the pressures that produce a common process for sorting students into their classrooms. I would like to explore the roles of teachers in this process because I feel like they're the most pivotal roles in this piece. And interviews will be conducted utilizing questions that seek to understand if teachers notice unbalanced classrooms and therefore instructional settings are different for different students. I chose a purposeful sample of participants, and they will be interviewed using in-depth structured interview questions. The questions were designed based on Lichtman's preference for asking in-depth interview questions, his 2013 book. Much of this type of questioning would be observed more as a conversation between a participant and an interviewee if someone were to watch this interview. And that was based on Lichtman again on page 195 of his 2013 book of how he likes to interview. She likes to interview, Marilyn, how she likes to interview her participants. The question, design, and order were somewhat derived from Spradley's 1979 work from ethnographic interviewing. And from that information, I designed 15 questions that were in line with my 4 research questions stated above. Continuing with methodology and data collection, we want to talk about our participants. I chose 2 teachers from the same grade level at the same school, and they were asked the 15 questions I mentioned earlier. Neither teacher knew that I had interviewed the other teacher. I didn't want them understanding or knowing really what I was going for, what I was looking for. Both teachers were between 32 and 38 years old. The younger teacher had been teaching for 19 years and the other one had been teaching for 14 years. One staff member is Caucasian, non-Hispanic, while the other one was Hispanic. The 2 teachers were chosen because they are in the same grade level at the same school. However, in the past years I've observed very different classroom compositions in these 2 classes. Both teachers are very kind, very sweet, and excellent instructors. However, for whatever reason that we're trying to explore here, very different class compositions over the years. Both staff members were interviewed in their own classroom for their own comfort. And I started with small talk about my graduate program and some of the things that we have to do as far as interviewing staff and so forth to get information. I gave them the release forms and we filled out all the pertinent pieces, and then I went into the 15 questions. As I went through the 15 questions, if I found an area I needed to delve into a little deeper or I needed to ask more about, I did so as part of this interview process. All conversations were recorded and then typed up at the end. I also jotted down nonverbal cues that I was seeing in the staff member. And then in the end, when I left, I went straight to my office and jotted down any of my own thoughts, feelings, and responses. Moving on to the findings section of my pilot project, I wanted to discuss some of the original codes I started with, and then where they turned into categories, and then finally themes. Originally, some of the words I found were variety, evenly distributed, seems similar, spread out, uneven, unequitable, equitable. So these all kind of went along with the idea of how a class seems, a classroom composition. And I boiled that down to uneven, equitable, similar, distributed, and then description of student placement is what it looks like to me, or equity of student abilities in the classroom. And then finally my theme was equitable distribution and equity of students. second area sounded more like this. It started with volunteers, power parent, problem kids, ELD, low ESS, families, RSP, APE, speech, academic level, and those tended to sound like how they were describing students to me. So my category A, the next level for coding, I want parent support, student support, academic, non-academic. And then my next, I evolved that a little bit further to support systems and programs and academic, non-academic elements. And then finally my theme turned into individual student traits and characteristics. My third area was behaviorally capable, maturity, academic needs, outlook, learning style. I boiled that down to academic ability, social status, outlook of the school, and boiled down further description of student academic and social levels, and then boiled down finally to the theme student cohort description. What is a student cohort as a whole group of third graders? How would you define them? And then last, I had the four. Last group was get to know, dance, activities, music, breaks, variety, and wiggle time. Those I boiled down to flexible responses, open to breaks, variety of responses, variety of skills. And what I'm starting to look at now is this sounds like things that a teacher may need to be able to do with a certain group of kids or a certain cohort. And so that boiled down to be flexible year to year, be open to new tactics for new cohorts, and then finally my theme was teacher instructional flexibility year to year. So my final themes, equitable distribution and equity of students. Teachers talked about that. Individual student traits and characteristics, how each individual student looks to the teacher. Student cohort description, how does the whole cohort look to the teacher? And then teacher instructional flexibility year to year. How does the teacher respond to cohorts and specific students year to year? Now, if you think about that, my Caucasian teacher has very good classes most times, and my Hispanic teacher often used to receive students low SES, ELDs, behaviors, and that's not fair, obviously. So if you think about those four themes, those are the things those two teachers talked about. So they are recognizing there's a difference. They're not recognizing it's the placement process yet. I was very interested to do the next portion of this paper. It was discussion of findings, and it's where I kind of compared the two teachers and how they were responding to my questions, my 15 questions. And their answers were very similar. It's almost like, you hear the blue line with the police officers, everybody runs the same line. And so in this case, it was very similar that they felt like initially as I started out with the grand questions, the bigger ideas, the overall, oh yeah, everything's fine, everything's good, everything's working. And I believe that's because it's the process that everybody uses year after year. It's just common practice. But as I started to get into kind of like the one-hit question where I'm being a little more pointed, that's where the answers started changing from teacher to teacher a bit. My Hispanic teacher mentioned that she did notice a difference in her classroom compositions, but she hasn't wanted to say anything for a while because she didn't want to seem like she's griping. But her perspective is that she's Hispanic, and therefore the teachers in the grade level below her give her those Hispanic students, believing that's the best setting for them. However, what she ends up getting or finding is that she has a large number of students that are behavior problems, families that are not able to work in the classroom, probably because they're working outside, and she has an inordinate amount of ELD students, which means, everything from language to math to science, everything's different, plus the kids are being pulled in and out and so forth. There's all kinds of ramifications to that. So while the second grade or the grade below them feels like they're doing something special for these kids, it's actually a disservice. The Caucasian staff member noticed that some classes are unequals sometimes. She didn't jump in to give me that. I had to delve into those questions a little bit more. She chalked it up to, oh, it's luck of the draw, it's the kind of cohort we have this year, and that kind of thing. But she also put out there that she will often go to the grade level below her and say, give me the most difficult child. And she does do that, and she does a great job with those students. But I believe that's her way. I mean, that would be a great research piece too. I believe that's her way of trying to keep things somewhat equal with her peer by taking one of the most difficult kids out of the pot into her classroom. But she too thought the process could be improved. But she didn't see it as segregation. She thought that word was way too strong. Whereas when I asked the Hispanic teacher, do you feel this process works well? She said, no, it works fairly well. But when I asked if it could be improved and does it equate with segregation as it is now, she said yes. So there is a different perspective there. And finally, in discussion and findings, we're supposed to have, what does the actual research say? So the research shows that low SES and ELD students receive notably different instruction. That's from Belfi in 2011, Conger in 2005, and Kellegrides et al. In 2013. It was found these social groups are in classroom of new teachers more than high-performing students. In my case, it's with a Hispanic teacher. Also, their peers are more likely to be low ES, or ELD rather than the advantaged students. And then I quoted this earlier, the grounded theory of Hargreaves in 67 and Richer in 76, that these students understand that they are in a lower group. They understand that they're not in the privileged group, and this affects their student outcomes, their self-perception, and their student achievement. I kind of believe this is where our gaps start, is in that, right at the elementary level, and then proceed on through 8th grade. Everson's team stated, recognizing that specific teachers excel with specific student types while offering pedagogical advantages may result in a school that is highly tracked or segregated. And based on my findings with the interview questions, that's right on, exactly right. And finally, we are at the end, my conclusions and recommendations. The purpose of this study was to explore the teacher's perspective of their participation in the student placement process, and my hope was to shed light on this common procedure so stakeholders understand the impact of this process on students, and that it's not always fair and equitable. In completing this study, it's the hope of myself, researcher, that the participants will understand the causes of sorting students in less than heterogeneous manners. In turn, the participants may be better able to afford all students a fair and equitable educational outcome through a changed process. I see teachers as one of the most powerful forces in this current process. They're pivotal, as reasons I stated before. So the implication is to create a level of knowledge within our staff members, so they're better able to communicate and collaborate around the idea of a balanced classroom for all teachers and all students. It's the recommendation of this study that principals need to lead this effort. Seen as teacher leaders, principals have to create the environment and the setting to have these conversations with staff members and make sure that they are, it's a safe environment to talk about these things. It's a very difficult conversation to have. And remember, principals, they have to be knowledgeable of the facts and of the research, and often they're going to have to find and identify those pieces of research, cut out the pertinent pieces, and create a situation where they can have a conversation on this topic in less than an hour at a staff meeting, or maybe a little more than an hour if you're lucky at a professional development. Once they have those conversations and they're showing this data and these research pieces to the staff, I think they will be better able to have a conversation around student placement in a more credible manner. But then the real work starts, because as a principal, you're going to have to create this cohesive team of teachers and other stakeholders to go out and say the same thing to parents and families and others, that we're changing our process for placing students based on what's good for all students. This will be a difficult task, and it'll be very time consuming. For further research, I think it'd be a really neat idea to do a mixed method study and actually look for classes similar to what I did but on a grander scale. Look for classes where the students are nested under the teachers and you have a discrepancy between teacher A and teacher B in the same grade level, even the same school, and then give them these 15 questions or questions like those and find out what exactly is happening. And then past that, it just needs to be more of a national push so teachers and administrators understand that this process is harmful right now, and we need to look at all of the pressures that impact this process and make it less equitable for all students. I appreciate your time. Thank you. I hope everything's going well. My phone number, 626-890-0918. If you have any questions, I'm on the road. Give me a call. Thank you.